What's up, everybody? Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the 4.10 agent tier list, because there have been a lot of movement going on right now in the pro scene. Now that a lot of the changes are finally live and settling in, all the big changes to Jet, Chamber, the addition to Fade, nerfs to Sova. I mean, there's been so many changes that have taken a long time to settle in, but now we get to look and see what agents are seeing a lot of play, what agents are dominant, and what agents are falling down the wayside. So there's a lot we got to talk about and break down, but the GameLeap website has your best tips, tricks, guides, and so much if you want to pop off and dominate to climb to Immortal and beyond with ease. Do yourself a favor and go check it out right now down below. Now for this week, we're going to be analyzing the new pick rates that have come out of NA in the first 2 weeks of groups. And this is all the data right here. And it's important to understand that there are several characters missing from this data. And you're like, okay, why are they missing? Well, they have so little pick rate, they are off the goddamn list. And these characters would probably be in what we would call the F tier for pro play. And of course, there's no Phoenix. We've talked about Phoenix extensively. He basically just is very bad and he needs huge buffs or rework. And Reyna is one of those characters that might be S tier or A tier for ranked play, but for pro play, she's not very good. Basically, in a team setting, she is just not what you really want to have. When you can work off each other, there's so many better options. But if it's you and only you, and you have a whole bunch of just brainless teammates, then Reyna's great for rank. But the true interesting character here that is seeing so little play out of nowhere is Killjoy. Now, while a couple of teams here or there did play her, she had a less than 6% pick rate. And that is absolutely ridiculous. This character just basically fell out of nowhere. Now, it's important to understand that EU is still playing her in about the 15 to 20%. So she's not dead in every single region. But honestly, the character is looking weaker and weaker. And I really think that one of the big problems is that there's a lot of options, a lot of other characters that people would rather play. And with the rise of 1, KO, which can just turn off a lot of her abilities. 2, there's a million different lineups that can just break all of her freaking utility, whether it's Breach, whether it's Sova. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room is Chamber, which, spoiler alert, this freaking character has almost a 90% pick rate. It's just absurd. And while Killjoy is fine in ranked play, I mean, she is not even close to touching Chamber in ranked either. And realistically, if we want her to be more competitive, probably both her and Cypher need some buffs somewhere. And I think the big thing that you could do for Killjoy is just make it so she could be a little bit farther away from her utility before it turns off. I think that's pretty fair and allows her to be a little bit more flexible with her positioning. When she is set up on one site, she can like drift towards the other one if the enemies are starting to make a lot of pressure in that area. Now, speaking of Cypher, Cypher is on the page at least, but he is not doing great. Now, Breeze is one of the maps that he sees quite a bit of play on, and that was one of the ones that was played the least in the sample size. But even still, Cypher is seeing no play on Fracture, Ascent, Haven, Icebox, or Bind, and he's not even seeing that much play on Split either. Really, this character is just really underpowered, unfortunately. There was some teams experimenting with him here or there, but honestly, Cypher is going to need some buffs, and of course, he's on the radar for Riot. So for now, in pro play, he's probably something like D tier, a little bit outside of F tier with Killjoy, but he's not that great. And even in ranked, I think that there are a lot of better options. Now we're moving up a bit to the C tier, and these are characters that are pretty strong, but they haven't quite cemented their mark in pro play yet. First off is Neon. She did see a little bit of play on Fracture, Ascent, and Haven. Notably, Optic played her in the grand finals to a win quite a bit ago. That was a few changes ago, but the character is seeing play in other regions as well. And while she doesn't have a crazy high pick rate, she still is unique and powerful in what she does. But right now, there's a lot of better options in the duelist category. If we're talking about Jet or Raze, they're really strong, and really a lot of compositions are only running one duelist and sometimes no duelist. And when you're doing that, when you're, stacking on that Chamber, that double initiator, you really aren't interested in playing Neon, unfortunately, but she's still fantastic for ranked. Now, the next character that we have in that C tier is actually Astra. And Astra has quite a bit of pick rate, getting a slight resurgence up to that 17%. And it's really interesting to see her slowly pick up pick rate. Now, unfortunately for Astra, even when she was the best character in the game, she saw almost no pick rate. Like when she was the strongest, she is the opposite of Reyna, where Reyna is amazing in ranked and really garbage at pro play. Astra was amazing in pro play and really garbage in ranked. And now she's just okay in pro play, and she's just basically unplayable in ranked unless you're at the highest level in Immortal Plus. Not only is she very hard to play, but she requires a lot of synergy with your team, and that's why in pro play, that's where you're gonna get the best use out of her. And even in that environment, she's losing to Omen, Brimstone, Viper, and she's definitely the weakest out of all the smoke options. Doesn't mean she's unplayable, but she does need some slight buffs if she wants to be more competitive. At 17%, I think buffing like one ability might put her up past that 20%, which would make her all of a sudden competitive with Brimstone and Omen at 30. Now we're actually gonna move up to the B tier, and these are characters that are pretty strong. They're seeing substantial play, but they aren't like meta defining. You're not gonna see them in every single game or on every single map guaranteed, but there are definitely strengths to these characters, and they might even have a lot of potential. And the first one is Fade. Fade is at a 22% pick rate, seeing very little play on Fracture, mainly because Fracture is just filled up. There's a lot of like auto includes on Fracture. Brim, Breach, Chamber, and Raze are like auto includes on Fracture, so it doesn't leave a lot of space for a lot of other characters. Now, she's seeing a decent amount of play on Ascent, and I think that's probably because Ascent is goddamn paper thin, and of course, she's even seeing some play with Sova, which is definitely interesting. I called that before, where double initiator could be pretty strong. Now, a lot of people are going to say, okay, she's seeing less pick rate than Sova. That means she lost the initiator information gathering role to Sova, but she's new. And you got to remember that pro teams are going to play what they know. And a lot of people are way better at Sova. They've been able to practice that character since, you know, the game came out, and Fade is very difficult to master, and she's already up to 22%. I would say that she's gonna slowly increase more and more as time goes on, and she could surpass Sova before too long, potentially, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, some other characters that we do have in the B tier that I'm gonna rapid fire hit, we do have Skye, Jett, and KO. These are all characters that I want to talk about for different reasons. So Skye is very good on a map like Bind, seeing good play on maps like Haven, and is a really strong initiator. The only weakness to Skye, if any, is that the initiator role is so heavily contested. I mean, there are so many good options. Fade's eating up her pick rate, Breach is eating up her pick rate, Sova's eating up her pick rate. Don't even get me started on KO. I mean, there's just so many great options that it makes the initiator role really, really balanced. And it's not like one is gonna run away with the pack when they all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. And I'm actually pretty happy with the way that they balance things. And I did mention KO as well, same boat. KO's really strong. I actually think he's on just raw power level, potentially a top 5 agent, but there's so many competitive initiator options, and it only got more competitive with the introduction of Fade, that even if he's dominant in some situations, you're not going to see him necessarily all the time on every map. And that's why I can't put him like all the way up in the S tier, even based off power level, because you can't have a character that is in the S tier if you don't see him all the time, or you maybe don't even see him on like 3 or 4 maps. You can't really call that character an S tier. Now, the really big elephant in the room is Jett, right? Jett fell pretty freaking hard. Sees no play on Fracture right now in NA. Like very, very low pick rate on a lot of maps like Bind, and even Split she's seeing like no play. Now she's still seeing substantial play on Haven, Icebox, Breeze. These are maps that she's still good at, but she's not as ubiquitous as she was before. In fact, it seems that Chamber just stole like all of her pick rate. And I really do think that the initiator meta is something that is just growing and becoming better and better. And because Jett can no longer up in the same way that she could before, it just makes more sense to run a Chamber, and you don't need that level of initiation when you could just double stack an initiator. Like, why get a Jett that could dash in when you could just rock like a Breach and a Sova together, or even a Raze initiator that is going in with like a Sova dart or a Breach flash, it just makes a lot more sense and raises more flexible of an agent in more situations. So while Jett is still really good for ranked play, for pro play, she has taken quite the hit. I mean, going from 70% pick rate all the way down to 30, that is pretty brutal. And then next up, I do want to talk about A-tier agents, and there's several agents I want to put in here. I want to put Omen, Brimstone, Viper, Sova, and Sage all in the A-tier. That's a lot of characters, but we're going to go through them. First up, let's talk about the smokers. All of them are sitting around 30%. Omen at 31, Brim at 31, Viper at 30, and we've talked about this extensively. Viper is basically guaranteed to see play on Breeze and Icebox. So because the data here is a little bit off, as in there were only 2 games played of Breeze, she doesn't have as big of a pick rate as she would appear, but you gotta keep in mind that on Breeze and Icebox, she's like a necessity, right? You could play some of the other smokers in addition if you wanted to, but you don't have to, and most teams don't. Now that makes her really strong on just those maps, but the other maps have a healthy mix of competition. Like on Fracture, Brim is like almost 100% pick rate, right? And on Bind, he's really high pick rate as well. But on Ascent and Haven, it's Omen. And on Split, it's like Omen and actually a little bit Astra as well. So it creates a pretty healthy balance right now. I think that the only thing that would balance this role further, if there was an addition of one more controller that could block off the long way sight lines like Viper could, and then maybe an addition of a map that would require a smoker like that. Because there are more, you know, regular maps that don't rather than they do. So adding one more map like that and then adding one more like opposition to Viper that could split that pick rate will probably make the controller role like perfectly balanced. And if you want to be a controller main, you most likely need to learn Viper. Like you can get by on Brim or Omen. While there are like preferences on the maps based on pick rate, you can really play either or on the maps that the other one would play on because they're not that different from one another. But on the maps that you need Viper, you need freaking Viper. So you don't have to play a controller on those maps, but if you're going to, it should be Viper. Now, I did mention Sova, right? And Sova still has a crazy cracked out pick rate on Breeze, on Icebox, and pretty high on Ascent as well. But he's seeing very little play on a lot of other maps. Like Fracture, he's seeing no play. On Haven, he's seeing like no play. On Split, he's seeing no play. So there's a lot of these maps that he's really not seeing the maxed out pick rate anymore. Like on Haven, the initiator of choice right now is Breach. Breach is just become cracked out of nowhere on Haven, and even Sky is played. A lot of teams are playing double initiator, Breach, and Sky with only one duelist right now, or some teams are not even rocking a duelist, which is crazy. Now, Sova is still really strong, but I think that the rise of Breach is hurting him, which the meta has shaped in a way where Breach has just become really great at taking off sight lines from chamber, or clearing sight, or allowing for an initiation by Raze, and that simultaneous to the introduction of Fade, and then just the initiator role being really stacked, because KO has also just been rising in the pick rates as well over the past like 4 months. So all of a sudden, you know, he's not where he used to be. He's not as strong as he used to be. Still amazing, still a phenomenal character, and still really great in ranked, but he's only in the A tier. Now, the last character I wanted to talk about in the A tier is Sage. Now, Sage is an interesting one because Sage is kind of quite a bit higher than she has been in the past. She's the only Sentinel that is seeing substantial play besides Chamber, who is almost like in his own class, and she's seeing a lot of play on maps like Icebox and maps like Split and Fracture. Honestly, she's a character that I could imagine moving up or down, and a lot of teams that are relying more on coordination are using her instead of a duelist to actually complement the initiators. You don't need someone that can engage really aggressively on your team. You need someone that once you take site control with a Breach, for instance, you can wall off a certain area, get that spike down, delay, slow, and you get a lot of like incremental team value with the heals and the res. So ultimately, this character is just really great for pro play in a really healthy spot at the top of A tier. And honestly, she's really great for ranked as well. Sage is looking better than she has in quite some time. Now, last up, we got to talk about the S tier. And these are the characters that you're more likely to see traditionally. These are really powerful on the maps they see play in, and they are just you know, characters that you need to either play or have a plan to play around. Expect to see these a lot more in ranked. First up, we got to talk about Breach. Breach has went on a complete tear. For a while, he saw no pick rate, and then when Fracture came out, he saw a huge amount of pick rate on Fracture, which he still does, 100% pick rate on Fracture, but now, out of nowhere, he's seeing like 100% pick rate on Haven too, and still seeing some play here or there. Ascent, freaking Split, a little bit on Bind. Like, players and teams are trying out Breach, and I think that Breach is a character that is primed to just be, you know, one of the best characters going forward, especially if pro teams keep playing around the maps where he's really, really great on. While his pick rate's a little bit inflated here, I still think that he barely touches F tier based on his power level. And really, when you see a very, very competitive role like Initiators, where there's not like one or two that are throwing and not playable, like in the Sentinel role, it's like every single Initiator is great, and he's the one that is the most picked at the top of the Initiators. I think for that alone, he deserves the S tier. Now, the S tier duelist right now is Raze, 54% pick rate, seeing almost full pick rate on Fracture, almost full pick rate on Bind, always full pick rate on Split, always have. Pretty good pick rate on Ascent and Haven as well. The only map that she doesn't see play on is Breeze. And this character has become the duelist of choice for pro teams right now. They're playing either Initiator or two Initiators. They're always playing a Chamber. You're gonna see that in a second when we break down those stats. They're typically playing one Controller, two Initiators, one Sentinel in Chamber, and one Duelist is typically what they're rocking. That's typically the comp that we're seeing, with the occasional swap out with Sage instead of the second Initiator. Now, this character is really, really great at helping to secure sight, and you could see how on Fracture, especially with retakes, how good of a combo Breach and Raze are. When you have the Boombot to create and clear space, you got stuns, you have flashes, you have Raze that can fly in, flashes with ultimate, flashes with stun. There's so much that work really well together as far as retakes are concerned that it just makes sense, right? And of course, Raze has always been a menace in ranked play, but I think she's finally like taking her spot as the #1 duelist, and it's about damn time for this character. But we got to talk about the king, the apex predator, the ridiculous freaking character known as Chamber. 89% pick rate, 100% pick rate on Fracture, 90 on Ascent, 100 on Haven, 100 on Icebox, like over 50% on all the other maps as well. He's just ridiculous. Like, he's unstoppable right now. It is absurd. You've probably seen a Chamber on both teams in every single one of your ranked games. Understandably so. He's probably the best ranked character, and he's the best pro character. So really, Chamber's the best character in the game. I mean, the numbers don't lie. He is the best. If you are a god tier Chamber, go ahead, lock him in and climb your ranks. And realistically, how you interact with Chamber in your ranked games is going to change a lot about your wins and losses. You got to keep in mind the things that Chamber is really, really good at. Holding an off angle, teleporting away after he gets a kill. He has a really powerful weapon to do so. So using your utility to clear corners properly and forcing Chamber to teleport and then taking the space he leaves behind, incredibly important. Learning how to jiggle peek an op properly, because you're gonna go up against ops every single game because Chamber has one built in. That is incredibly important. Think about how you can deal with Chamber. How can you fight Chamber? How do you interact with Chamber? What are common Chamber plays and holds? These are the things that are gonna help you get a leg up on your competition, and it's gonna really help you climb outside of just locking Chamber yourself. But ultimately, this is my pro Valorant tier list. Of course, there's some characters that are going to be slightly better in ranked and some characters that are going to be slightly worse in ranked. But all in all, I think it's a pretty balanced list for you to analyze and learn from. And after we get some more data down the line, we're going to be revisiting this and re-breaking this down. Plus, I can compare it to other regions and their pick rates as well, if you're interested. So definitely let me know down below. And if you want to climb to Diamond, Immortal, or even Radiant, like so many in the community have already done, do yourself a favor and go check out the GameLeap website right now down below.